Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Transform Parenting podcast. And I'm really happy to introduce you to a gorgeous woman, the lovely Katie, who's going to share her story about having two babies. I always maintain that every birth story is part of our rite of passage or our transformation into birth wisdom, into secret women's business. And so no birth is ever in vain. It does teach us a lot. And sometimes the really difficult births can often teach us the most. So let's just kick off with Katie, and I'll get Katie to just introduce. Katie, if you could just tell the listeners, please, a little bit about your first birth and how that then changed your way of thinking when you were coming into your second birth.
Sure, thanks, Tracy. So my first baby I had 15 years ago. Hard to fathom that, really. Um, and I think it went the way many first births go. From everything I've heard since then, it felt like lots of things were happening to me, and I wasn't really in control of any of them. I felt like I was sort of at the mercy of a chain of events. I went through the private system with my first baby, and I went into sort of pre-labor, which lasted for several days, and nothing I seemed to be able to do was going to speed it up. And in the end, I had a little bit of intervention. I had an epidural. I had various drugs, and so when my baby was finally born, which was vaginally, I didn't really have a lot of sensation as to what was happening to me. I didn't really feel transition really, other than the sensation of needing to push. And although it was, I guess, a problem-free birth, I'm sure that textbook would have said everything went great. I sort of came out of it going, oh, that's not what I was expecting. I didn't feel empowered. I didn't feel like any of it was my choice. And I was kind of left a bit, I guess, a bit baffled about a few things. What I could have done to have made it maybe slightly easier on myself emotionally. What I could have said or done with my caregivers to have made the experience maybe feel different or go differently. Was there anything I could have done? It made me realize how little I knew about what actually happens during birth, even though I'd done the birth education class at the hospital.
So, Katie, can I just come in there? Can you just
Yeah.
explain a little bit? It sounds like you did have some expectation that there was something that was quite major that was meant to happen in this process. Through your preparation, whatever that was, can you just describe what your actual expectations were, and then when you hit the reality, why there was obviously a mismatch there?
Yeah, I wrote a birth plan. So I feel like I was probably, I had the information. It's 15 years ago, so it's hard to remember the details, but I had the information I feel like I thought I needed at the time. I'm sure in the birth education classes I did that we were told, write a birth plan, but be aware it probably won't go to plan, but that's okay, write it anyway. I think I hoped for a natural vaginal birth. I hoped that that I wouldn't need intervention, and that all the decisions that were made were my decisions. I think that was probably really what it came down to. I'm sure I would have written that in my birth plan. But there were a number of things that led up to when I finally went into hospital that just they were outside of my control. I wanted to go in earlier because I felt uncomfortable. I was exhausted. I hadn't slept for a couple of days and I needed support. And they kept saying, no, 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 your day's off. This isn't, you'd call them and they'd say, no, no, how far apart are your contractions? No, you can't come in yet. And I didn't really know how to manage it at home because I felt like I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know that's how the experience was going to be. And a few days of labor is exhausting, even though it wasn't even real labor. It was pre-labor, so I think coming out of it, it just felt like that's not how I thought things would be. And And I think I felt a little bit annoyed, to be honest, with how it all went, because in the end, it felt like the decisions that I had to make, because I was told I had to make them, they weren't really my decisions, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. I felt like it just had to be that way. And that's not what my expectation was.
Mm.
Realistic or not, I just think that I went into the experience without fully understanding exactly what might happen to my body
Mm.
and where I might be able to have a bit more control.
Yeah. And you had this idea of a natural birth, Katie. What did that idea of a natural birth mean to you? What was.
Um, it's hard to say because I guess my perspective's very different now,
Yeah.
on what that means, in part due to the education I've had since then. But I suppose at the time it just felt like that was the ultimate thing that I could have achieved with my first baby. That would have been it would have meant that, nothing unexpected happened. It would have meant that my body did what I thought it was supposed to do. So there were a lot of ideals in that,
Yeah.
in my thinking
Thank
that
you for.
may not have been realistic.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly one of the things I try to do is to demystify birth in the sense that we can have very, as you point out, unrealistic expectations about what's supposed to happen. The idea of a natural birth sounds like that's what's supposed to happen and that's what's going to set us up for parenting afterwards. But sometimes birth needs help. And it's not the type of birth that matters. It's often what gets activated in the mother.
Mm,
The mother needs to, when she walks through that doorway into parenting, she needs to be ready for what's on the other side because that's where the real journey is.
mm,
And birth is meant to prepare us for that. So we can have some ideals and things that are fashioned about other people's teachings or books or experts or other people's stories, when in fact every woman has to walk their path. And the process of doing that is part of coming to terms with the reality of what it means to be a mother. But I do believe, though, intrinsically, there is a part of every woman who wants to be able to birth in a way that helps her to feel empowered. So, as much as we can also listen to the noise externally, there is a part of us that wants to be able to get through it and wants to be able to feel great about that next phase. And it
mm.
sounds like your reality felt a little bit flat. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely,
Mm.
definitely. And it's funny because people would ask me, I was one of the first in my friendship group to have a baby, and people would ask me, well, what was it like and how do you feel about it? And I didn't really have anything negative to say, and I feel grateful for that. I couldn't really complain about it. I was looked after and nothing awful happened to me, but it did feel flat. It did feel like I didn't really experience a lot of it. Like I wasn't there. I wasn't really present and I didn't really understand what was happening to me.
Mm. So, how did that experience then prepare you for baby number two? Was that
Yeah, well,
a long time
yeah.
after, wasn't it?
Sorry.
It was a long time after you.
Yeah, 11 years later.
Mm.
Yeah, well, I suppose going into that, I was in a very different stage of life. And I felt a lot more knowledgeable about childbirth, about my body, about parenting, about becoming a mother, all of that stuff. And I felt like I think I understood that I wanted my birth experience to be, an entry point, into a new phase in my life, exactly as you described. I think I was very aware of that, and so I sought out, a pathway, which was your classes.
Mm.
And I was so amazed by how much I didn't know. Even though I'd spent all these years talking about childbirth with other mothers and reminiscing over my own experiences and reading things, like many women, I was pretty obsessed with childbirth after the birth of my first child, and again after my second. But yeah, I was just amazed by how much I didn't know about my body, about what actually happens during childbirth, because the way that you teach it is very different to the way the hospitals teach it. Um, and and so it felt, entering that space of preparing for childbirth, with my second felt really empowered and really exciting, and that there were possibilities that I just didn't even understand before. I didn't even know they were there. And it also felt very, there wasn't so much an expectation or an ideal scenario. I was prepared for anything. I felt prepared for anything.
Yeah.
And that was a really different feeling. There wasn't really any fear around it.
That is the goal, that we prepare women to birth calmly, gently, lovingly, under all circumstances, and to realise what agency they have even when they need help. So in order to do that, then that information is incredibly powerful in helping to frame it in a way of being really, really clear of what is my role in this space. What if I need help, if I need a cesarean, what do I do then? And the teachings around that, I think, are what unloads the subconscious and the fears. Now, I don't think you ever get rid of fear in childbirth, but it certainly dials it down a lot.
Yeah.
So you started to realise more about your mind and your body and how it all worked together. Is that what do
Definitely.
you think shifted that fear dial for you?
I think I probably didn't have as much fear anyway because it was the second time, So once you've already experienced, a certain level of things that are maybe unexpected, you kind of, I guess, in a way, an anxious mind can sort of go, okay, well, I know what that's like, I know what it's like to have an epidural. I know what it's like to be in labour for a few days. I know it could be harder or worse than that, but I didn't really go there. I was kind of like, well, surely it's going to be easier the second time. I did think that. I thought it's got to be easier the second time. But it's funny how sometimes you hear things. I remember a midwife, I think it was a midwife who said this to me at one point, said, it's been 11 years since you had your first baby, so I hope you're not expecting that it's going to be like as if you just had one 2 years ago. You may have to start from scratch again, like this implication that
belief to plant.
Okay. Yeah, like my body wasn't going to remember anything because I was really hoping that I had that up my sleeve, that second births are supposed to be easier, that's what we hear. And that did give me a little bit of a shock. I thought, oh no, I don't really want to go back to square one. But I sort of put that out of my mind. I really focused on the positive, the positive things that I was learning. And then also, I think a really big part of it is the supportive birth partner. That's that's something that it happens the first time around as well, where the birth partner often doesn't know what's going on because the birthing parent doesn't know what's going on. And so with my second birth, having a really supportive partner who did the class with me, who also felt very empowered by that, and that made a really big difference to my sort of preparations as well, knowing that he knew what to do and that he would be there for me and that he had a role. There was actually a role, not just someone standing there going, are you okay? Are you okay? Do you need a drink of water? And that felt good too. That felt like we were going into a thing, like I can't think of the good analogy for it really, but we were going to enter this experience, this new world, and we had all the equipment and all the tools that we needed to do that the best way that we could. That's how it felt.
That changes everything, having a partner who knows what they can do to make a difference, and not just a tokenistic difference, a serious difference. A very big impact on a labouring woman's hormones and support that birth to become easier and even shorter. Because of the love hormone, oxytocin, the partner is more placed to influence oxytocin levels than anybody else in that room. And when they know that, they can really milk that role, which is lovely. It's great.
Yeah.
Katie, the other significant thing you did for baby number 2 is you changed your model of care. Do you want to just talk briefly about that?
Yeah, look, there was like no second that I didn't doubt that I wanted to go into a birth centre and have continuity of care through the public system. It just was like I can't even really explain. It wasn't like it was a thought out decision. I just knew that's what I was going to do. There was no way I would go through the private system again, because I just think that it's very much about hospital policy. Timing, regulation, all of that. That's how it felt to me. And I know that it's like that for a lot of women. And yes, okay, you have that extra level of protection, but for second time, it just felt like the right thing to do, and I didn't really question it. And I did everything I could to get into one of the birth center programs. I do think I phoned a million times, and I got into the Calvary Birth Center, which I was really excited about because it's close to home. And yeah, that was a really different experience because I was mostly taken care of by midwives. I don't think I saw a doctor until I was overdue until that point. And just being taken care of by midwives who were empowering, who didn't do things like measure my baby and tell me how big they were going to be and any of those sorts of things. I didn't have any extra reason, and the only like tiny little negative thing that I could say was what I described before when one of them said to me about maybe having to start all over again. But that was said with a sense of humor, and it wasn't critical or designed to, to make me feel as though something was going to go wrong, which I think can often happen with doctors.
Well, tell us about the birth. How did it unfold?
Yeah, so well, it was it was still very different to what I was sort of expecting it might be. I again, my body was really slow to get started. I was having sort of pre-labor on and off for a few days, and I was overdue. And being over the age of 40, I was quite concerned about what would happen, that I would be forced into an induction due to my age. And that is what actually happened. I did get pushed towards that, and I also felt quite confident in holding that off for as long as I could. I think the rule is, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think the rule is that once you hit 40 weeks, if you're over 40, they'll just try and induce you straight away. And that's on doctor's advice. Usually the midwives have to follow whatever that protocol is at the hospital. But then you can actually say no to that. And that was something that I wouldn't have been aware of first time around. So I felt confident in telling them that I wasn't ready yet and I wanted to give it another week. And so in the end, I went to 40 weeks plus 9 days. So I just went past that extra week, and there was a lot of pressure. It wasn't coming from the midwives. They did all their tests and checks, and they were really satisfied with where I was at. That there was nothing wrong, that there was no reason to induce, and that if I wanted to keep going, I could. And I really loved that I had that support. But in the end, I did get induced. I felt like I'd sort of pushed it to a point where, no pun intended, where I couldn't justify waiting any longer. I was starting to get nervous. And so when I made the decision that yes, okay, I'll come in tonight and we'll get induced, and it felt like it was my decision. So that was good. There was a little part of me, of course, that was upset about that, but I just accepted that it had to be that way.
Yeah. That's a really big thing to push back against the hospital policies and medical opinion. What was it about that situation that enabled you to do that, Katie? Because that's
Support. It was support, 100%.
yeah.
I think you feel very vulnerable at that point in your pregnancy. I definitely felt very vulnerable. I had support of my main midwife who'd been looking after me for most of my pregnancy. And she was also a senior midwife as well. So I felt like she was older than me. She'd been a senior midwife at that birth center for a really long time, or at the hospital for a really long time. And I felt like, of all the people I could have had looking after me, like she was the one. I was just, she was a mother hen. I felt really supported by her. And also my husband, he was there. He was, he wasn't asking me what I wanted to do. He was telling me that he thought I was right and that we should, hold out, and he would check with me, and it didn't feel like he was transferring pressure to me either to make the decision. So their support was everything. And the doctor who was pressuring me at that 40-week mark, he wasn't very nice, and he wasn't even a doctor at that hospital. He was a locum. And I felt that he was quite aggressive with me, and he started throwing statistics at me that I thought were really confronting, as if to say, if you don't get induced today, you're going to lose your baby. That's how it felt that he was speaking to me. And I said to him, but you've just looked at all of my test results and everything's fine. My blood pressure's fine. My amniotic fluid levels are fine. The baby's fine. like everything's fine, so why can't I just wait another few days? And eventually he left. It was hard. Like, I remember my heart beating really fast and feeling like I was in trouble, that I might have been doing the wrong thing. But deep down inside, I just had to look at my midwife, and she was, you're okay. Like, you've got this.
You were
So,
very, very fortunate to have a savvy, experienced, confident midwife who could help you to play that system, because there's a lot of pressure on doctors to manage, to make sure that they're doing, because it's their asses that get,
yep.
hauled up to a court of law if things
Yeah.
are wrong. So we do put the blame on doctors. And so there's a lot of pressure on them to act, but to have the confidence to say, look, thank you for those statistics, but right now I feel fine. And to get a sense of that within your own pregnancy, it's a big call. So I'm really happy for you that you did have that extra level of support and less noise, so that you could tune in to make what you felt was the right decision.
Yeah. And it did feel like the right decision, because it gave my body extra time to get ready,
Absolutely. So, inducing too early means that there's a lot more work to do to get the body to do something that it's not ready to do.
Yep.
So giving, little August those extra few days was probably really helpful, and it would have changed the way that birth unfolded.
Yep.
So,
I had acupuncture, and I also had tapping.
yeah,
I did all the things,
all the
Tracy. I don't know
things.
if you remember the conversation that we had. I
Yeah.
remember calling you and getting quite in that 9 days between the doctor's appointment and then being induced. I went through major anxiety. And I remember calling you and saying, please, can you give me some resources? I don't know where my head is at. I'm really scared. I was really scared about being induced, and you referred me to a couple of people, and so I had 2 acupuncture sessions and a tapping session, and I really felt like they were just the best things I could have done, because then when I did enter that induction, I was 100% confident.
Yeah.
And I wasn't scared, and I just was ready. I was so ready to meet him, and I just wanted to get on with it.
I want to be a mother to this child.
Yep, I want to meet him. It's been long enough.
So tell us about the birth, Katie.
Well, it still went on for a really long time, but mainly due to the induction. So I went in the evening, and they put in the tape, whatever they do, the gel, the tape, whatever the stuff is, and then that worked really quickly. I think I went. I think at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I had pressed the button. Oh, one of the unfortunate things about being induced when you're in a birth center is that you can't actually go into the birth center at that point, but you can keep your midwives.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so wonderful. I didn't really mind that I had to go to the regular birth suite. I knew it had a bath, so that was good. But so it was almost as good as the birth center. But I brought things in, to try and change the ambience of the room, because I remembered what birth suites were like from the first time. They're not that nice. Anyway, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, my contractions were quite close together, and I asked if we could go to the birth suite. I just felt like I needed to do that. Not long after we got there, my waters broke by themselves, so they didn't have to do that part for me, which I was really happy about. That gave me this real extra little bit of oomph that it was happening. And I didn't, yes, I had to have the induction started, but maybe the rest of it could all happen the way that I was hoping. So that was quite wonderful. But then after that, things slowed down. My body still wasn't really ready, It's very similar to last time. And I remember we had a birth photographer, and we'd called her in early in the morning, about 6 o'clock, saying, it's all happening, it's happening. Anyway, she came in, it wasn't happening. So she went back home again. And I ended up having to have, what's the hormone they give you? I can't remember what it's called.
The
Syntocin, yeah. So I was really upset about that. That was my blip in the day, because I was just like, I thought it was happening, and I thought I was annoyed at my body, and I remember thinking that last time too, why can't it just do what it's supposed to do? What's wrong with me? but it was a blip because, again, my midwives were really supportive in the same way that you would have been if you were there. You would have said, it's okay, we go with it, you know. Um, and so anyway, once that kicked in, labor happened really quickly, and then my active labor was only a few hours in the end. It was very intense. I I remember feeling really good though. I felt really good. I had amazing support. My midwife did change. I had a different one come in, but I saw my old faithful midwife. She was there for a lot of it, and she was there for the last part. And I ended up being in the bath for a lot of it, towards the end, last couple of hours. And then yeah, I guess the most significant moment that really stands out in hindsight was the moment when I started to get scared that things weren't going well. And this was probably only about 5 minutes before I gave birth. Um, and my midwife sensed that in me without me having to say anything. I was quite internal, in my processing at that point. And it was like she just read the situation so perfectly. She said, I think you need to get out of the bath. I think you need to change your position. And I was putty in her hands. Honestly, I just said, well, what do you think I should do? And she said, I want you to sit on the toilet. And she got me out and sat me on the toilet. And I remember in my mind, I was like, this is not right. I can't have my baby on the toilet.
Toilets are very comfortable places in labour, Katie.
I totally get this now, because
And your baby's nearly been born in the toilet, I tell you.
oh, I'm quite sure of it after having the experience. But I had that thought, but then also I was so trusting of her, and also there was a part of me that was like, you're right. I've been in the bath, I've been in the same position, and we're not getting anywhere. And she had checked, she had checked, and she was like, he's right there. He's right there, but it was something about my position. And of course, then once I actually birthed him, which was only a few minutes later, with 2 pushes on the toilet, he was out. He came out like a shot, and gave me a bit of an injury, and himself as well. But I think in hindsight, he was just a very big baby, and I probably wasn't in the right position to open up my pelvis in the way that it needed to be. So I'm so grateful that my midwife, again, the experience, and then my trust. It was a two-way thing. It was my trust back to her as well that enabled that to happen. And the outcome might have been slightly different had I not have had that. It's amazing how these little tiny moments can be so significant.
Yeah. Little shifts in the mind, little changes in what a mother's sensing. Women in labour are highly, highly sensitive to the things that are going on around them. And so little bits of encouragement and support the way you were given that can just shift things like that butterfly effect. Little things can make a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Katie, what was it like when you met him? Tell us about that.
I remember just looking at him thinking, who are you? Like, I was really confronted by his appearance. He just didn't look the way my other baby looked. And that was, I vividly remember thinking that, who are you? I don't know you. But also just this overwhelming joy and elation. And I still feel emotional just thinking about it now. It was literally like the best moment of my entire life. And if I think back to the whole experience, it was exactly what I wanted. And I'm so glad that I had that. I had that such a positive birth experience. It was really, I think, what I was looking for.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And how was it for your partner? I've got a beautiful photo of you that you shared.
I know. Oh my gosh.
I use it a lot.
My favorite. To skin contact.
Sorry, Katie, I'm just going to have to we'll have to edit that part. I'm just
going to. It just cut out for a sec.
Yeah, so say it again.
Yeah, he was elated and just completely overjoyed and emotional, and he got to have skin to skin contact with August straight away too, which is so beautiful, and such an important, necessary thing for fathers, I think. Yeah, it was, and I have one of my favorite photos actually is of him holding August, and you can just see how squished Augie's ginormous head was. It's just the perfect, immediately post-birth photograph. He's holding him to his chest, and just the look on his face is just it's really hard to put it into words. Share the photo. I love it. And it just says everything about a new father and a beautiful childbirth, and just that feeling of holding your baby for the first time. But geez, he was a thumper, such a thumper.
How big was he?
4.1 kilo.
Oh, well done. And you're not a
Um,
big woman either.
yeah, and he had a ginormous head. I remember the midwife measuring it once we got to go back to the birth center, which was a beautiful thing to do afterwards, and that's when they did all of his measurements, and she said, "Wow, okay, he's off the charts with the head." No wonder. No wonder we had a bit of a hard time.
Oh,
Oh dear. Yeah.
so it sounds like your feelings after this birth were very different to the first one. What do you think was the biggest difference?
Um, I felt empowered. I had control over what was happening to me. I felt I didn't feel like I didn't feel like things were happening to me. I felt like I was doing things. I was birthing my child rather than I was experiencing childbirth. And I
Yeah.
think that subtle shift was really important. And entering, becoming a mother again for the second time after that huge long gap, and going through, the first stage of getting to know my baby, and I felt so happy, so content. I wasn't scared. I wasn't hesitant. I felt supported. I was pretty much in a state of bliss for months. And in that, I have to just add that I had a dislocated tailbone and I was in a lot of pain. I had to get chiro for quite a while.
Mm.
And in any other stage of life, going through an injury, especially a painful injury like that can throw your whole life out. That's got a really big effect on lots of things. And yet, the bubble that I was in, the joy and contentment that I felt, it overrode all of that pain. I find that quite amazing, because that's to do with what was happening in my mind. As of course, it's hormones as well. I get that, but it's a lot to do with what's actually happening in your mind, due to the experience. So yeah, it's quite amazing to think back on that now, because I know that if I had a dislocated tailbone right now in my life, I probably wouldn't be able to override it with bliss and joy.
I think what you're
But yeah.
describing there, Katie, is what the actual design, Mother Nature's design is. She wants us to
Mm,
be activated, to be ready for the big journey on the other side of that doorway. And when you look at the hormones that are inherent in birth, both conception and also the birth process, a lot of it is around oxytocin and endorphins and
mm,
prolactin and even adrenaline at the end. And all of that's they're performance enhancing hormones. So they're designed to help that new mother be able to deal with the intensity of looking after a new baby. And so
mm,
it's really interesting you draw that out. And with your first baby, you knew something got lost in translation, something wasn't quite right. And yes, your care was different, but it sounds like this time you really did activate that, what I call the blueprint of creation or blueprint of potential of what you had
yeah.
inside of you to be able to deal with August.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I mean, also, they were very different babies. And I've often thought about this, with chatting with other parents and friends around, oh, my first baby was like this, oh, my second baby's very different. And I know that there's a really big transference of stress and anxiety and things like that around those early months of parenthood. I have to say, August was, as a newborn and as a young baby, very easy. It was very easy to take care of. And my first Toby was really challenging. You know, he had reflux and a number of things that made life tricky. But I also, thinking back on that in hindsight, I just can't help but wonder how much of that was the state that I was in and how I responded to the things that were happening. That it's so much more connected than I think. It's hard to
Mm.
put that into words, but
Yeah,
it feels very significant to me.
yeah. I think we certainly influence the state of our babies, and the baby is very, very connected, particularly in those first 6 weeks. They still feel that they're part of you and your body, which is why babies settle so much better when they're on their mothers or other partners. That imprinting that, oh, this is home, this is where I feel safe and secure, and that transference of your anxiety onto them or lack of has a huge influence. And of course, then, yes, your birth experience will influence that as well. But sometimes, babies have to deal with other little things in their systems that are beyond
Mm,
us. So we're not completely responsible, but we
mm.
certainly can influence it.
Yeah. And also the birth experience. I think the other thing that I really learnt was the birth experience, how that can affect the baby as well.
Yeah.
And that's something that I didn't really understand before with my first. But both my babies, both experiences, they actually both needed support after birth. So my first baby, he had reflux, and then he ended up developing ear infections, chronic ear infections, and he also had lots of feeding issues.
Mm.
And I didn't, lactation consultants weren't so common back in 2007. So
Yeah.
it took quite a long time for me to get support for that. But I found out through that support that I did eventually find that he had quite a lot of pain in his body,
Mm.
that they sort of suggested. So I ended up seeing a sacral cranial osteopath, and they specialize in babies, particularly newborns, and sort of let me know that it's quite common from labor and also from just being squished up inside the womb during pregnancy, maybe stuck in a certain position. That yeah, there can be discomfort and pain in the body, and then childbirth can make that worse, and that it's quite common, and that a lot of babies need a little bit of extra support in that area.
Mm.
And the same thing happened with August, except of course I had that experience from the first time. So I actually about when he was about maybe 10 days old,
Yeah.
I noticed that he wasn't really moving his right arm very much.
Mm.
It was sort of floppy. It just didn't seem right to me. And so because I was already receiving some care myself because of my tailbone, I sort of put two and two together and went, well, he came out really quick. Like he didn't really have time to come out the way that he probably should have come out. He shot out like a rocket. And which meant that maybe he might have done something to his shoulder on the way out. So I went to an osteopath who specialized in babies. It was a different one that time,
Mm.
and she found some congestion through his arm, and we had a number of sessions, and she worked it through, and we were all good in the end. And I loved that I knew that, I learnt that from the first time,
Yeah. That's great
and
advice.
even yeah, it was
Yeah.
it's so great, and I do tell a lot of new mums about this, because I do think it's something that certainly a doctor doesn't. They
Mm.
don't really pay that much attention. They do all the normal checks. They check that their eyes and their hearing and their reflexes and things like that, but they can't possibly know those things, and they normally don't come out straight away. It's like it's maybe noticed in feeding or sleeping behaviors, and it's very easy to just say, they need more cuddles, or they need more feeds, or oh, they don't like or that boob's not working properly,
Mm.
that maybe they just don't like lying on that side because a part of their body is uncomfortable and hurting. So I thought that was a really interesting experience too, that both my babies, even though they had very different pregnancies, very different labors, very different birth experiences, but they both needed that support
Yeah.
afterwards.
I spoke to a very, very experienced osteopath many years ago. We call him the baby whisperer. And he believes that every baby should be checked because of exactly what you're describing. Their little skeletal system's very soft. The nervous system's attached to it. If things are out of alignment, that's going to influence the way that their body functions, whether it be feeding, digestion, comfort, movement. All of those things will be influenced by that. So that's gold.
Yeah,
What you just
yeah,
shared right
yeah.
there. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I think it's a
Yeah,
good thing to do, even if your birth experience is pretty straightforward,
100%. Yeah.
just to get them checked, because that can really circumvent a lot of difficulties with newborn fussiness in those early days and weeks, and it's already intense enough.
Yeah, that's right.
Pain, you know.
That's right. And I guess it's like a lot of things in life with us too. Like, you could be feeling a bit tired or, your digestion's a bit out of whack, but you just kind of go, oh, it's fine. Like, it's fine. It's within normal range, and babies can be experiencing that too, but they can't tell us. They can't communicate that except for through the normal methods, which could mean anything.
Yeah.
Dirty nappy, need a cuddle, tired, hungry, who knows? Or they've got a sore arm or a sore neck or, yeah.
Katie, thank you. You've really shared a lot of really great stuff there that I can draw out for other people as well. Just quickly, the last two questions I like to finish with is, what have you learned about yourself as a result of being a birthing woman? And what would you share with pregnant women or other women thinking of having babies? What wisdom would you share?
Um, well, it's funny you should ask that because I just recently did share some wisdom with someone who asked for my wisdom, who's going to be embarking on that journey soon. And I think I said a few similar things to what I've shared in this interview, which is really around education, taking advantage of every single pathway you can to, to learn as much as you can about childbirth and about your body, and to have, your partner involved in that if you have a partner, so that you can prepare yourself, mentally in the best possible way to go into childbirth. And yeah, that's the advice. It's unfortunately, sometimes I think these pathways aren't available to everybody. I wish they were. I wish it was easier. But if you have the ability to, to do a proper birth education class like what you do, Tracy, I think it can change everything for first-time mums, for second-time mums, for fifth-time mums.
It does.
Yeah, even to do it over and over again. If I was to have another baby, I would do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
What
that's
did you learn about
it.
yourself?
Um,
That you can push out a 4.1 kilo baby.
yeah, well, aside from the fact that I have this very strong belief now that it doesn't matter how big you are, that any doctor who says, you have to have a cesarean because your baby's so big, I just think that is, excuse my French, complete crap. Like you can, it doesn't matter. I've the narrowest hips. I'm tiny.
You're quite, yeah.
I pushed him out. Okay, yep, I did some tailbone damage, but that might not have been any due to his size. That could have been due to the angle, could have been due to a whole bunch of things. So, could have been due to my body prior to labor as well. So, that's changed. I've learnt that about myself, that my body can do anything. I think the most important thing though is I learnt that motherhood is amazing. I learnt that motherhood is this beautiful, especially the first 12 months. And I had such a rough trot the first time. The first 12 months of my first child were probably the hardest 12 months of my entire life. And then to have probably this 12 months were probably some of the best 12 months of my entire life with August, that it just made me want to keep having babies. I wish that I had him a little earlier so that I could have kept going. Because I learned that motherhood is something that's aligned with me, that I guess I thought before that maybe I just wasn't, I wasn't really, one of those, I wasn't one of those earth mothers, Do you know what I mean, Tracy? It's hard to put it into words. I thought, I don't know about this. Like, maybe if I could just have a baby at about 2, just have them come to me at about 2. I just don't know if I want to go through all that other
Motherhood's a bit overrated.
Yeah, I'll take them later, but maybe not for those first 2 years. But I learnt that there's nothing more wonderful to me than sitting on a couch with half dressed with milk everywhere, just holding my baby. That was just such a beautiful revelation to me, and that I could be still and content in that moment was a powerful learning experience. Yeah,
really got to experience that full capacity of activation and what I call the upgrade from the woman into the mother. The mother is a bigger version of the woman.
Yeah.
She's there to, discover that she's far more magnificent than she could ever even imagine. And that's why your children will always be your greatest teachers. And that continues too.
It sure does.
They're always demanding more and more of you. And you just rise up. You have to. You either go insane, you either rise up or you go insane, I always say.
Yeah.
So I really love what you've shared today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was my
So
pleasure.
much wisdom in that. So, Katie's story is a really interesting story in that every birth leads us, guides us, teaches us, strengthens us, awakens what we have within us. And no birth is ever in vain. Her first birth led her to making different decisions, to doing different levels of preparation, and to really embrace her ability to make choice and to have a sense of agency and contribution to her birth. I think Katie's, reference around I felt like it was done to me in the first birth shifted for her second, where she wanted to be a part of that decision making. She exercised her decision making in a really powerful way too by being able to say no. Now, this is something that is hard to do. We don't always feel confident that we can push past medical opinion. But I always maintain that when women look at the information that those carers are giving, which is really a risk assessment, it is not a definitive, we think this is the best way to go for you. It is a risk assessment. And then you team that with real information about what's going on with that pregnancy, pardon me, with that pregnancy right here, right now, and a sense of the mother. Mothers tend to know when their babies need to be born, when they're asked. Then that tends to lead to better decision making and better outcomes. And I think what you'll find when you do exercise your capacity to say no is that a lot of your carers are very happy to support that, because they know that they work under policies, and these policies are about evidence about other women in other places. And that's great information. It helps us to assess risk, but best decision making happens when we actually engage and decide, is this the best way to go? And if you do decide to push back, there's often other ways that you can keep an eye on Bubby to just make sure that you're doing it in a paradigm of safety. So Katie's birth has so much to teach us, and I really hope that you've enjoyed our chat today, and I hope you'll enjoy us for more birth stories through the Transform Your Birth organisation. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.